Good evening, everybody. This is Jay Tahoe's fabulous podcast. This is live from the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn, heading back to Long Island because it has been a long day. But tonight we're going to discuss 90s babies, something everybody wants to talk about. Not only 90s babies, some 90s nostalgia, and being the last generation to grow up without technology. So this should be fun. The 90s, it's something I'm really passionate about. I grew up in it. I was not so developed psychologically yet, but I thought it was great. We had it was some good economic times for this country. Kids still played outside. I certainly did, but we had some good video games too. It was just a good time. It was maybe it could be a little naive because obviously being children at the time, obviously there were problems in the world. There's problems in the world. There's always going to be problems in the world, but it wasn't like post 9/11 America. We know that 9/11 was kind of the one single event that kind of changed the tone of how things are, and now it's just we live in a really serious world now. It's unfortunate, but and there's so many examples of how things have changed, post 9/11, right? I mean, I remember being a kid, and it was actually in 2000, we went to Canada. I went on a trip to Canada with my family, and we drove right up. You didn't even need a passport. You go right through customs. They'd give you your car a once-over and be like, okay, on your merry way. Not like that anymore, obviously. Even to go to Canada, you need a passport. You gotta, they're going to be looking into who's coming across the border, and not wrongfully so. I mean, we do need border security. We need the security at the airport. But 9/11 was really what made us aware that that a small group of people can cause damage to a large amount of people in a short amount of time. And we have a lot more. There's more school shootings. There's a school shooting in the news every month, basically. There's in the 90s there was Columbine, but now it's a widespread epidemic. So I'm not gonna sit here with this podcast and try to say that the 90s are, back in my day, things were so much better. Well, I'm not trying to here to harp like that and, convince you that the 90s were better. I just want to go, delve into some nostalgia because, I think it's something, my generation, we love nostalgia, right? It's a whole business. Why do you think, you walk into any game store and there's remakes of all these games that we had when we were kids? We had Pokemon, we had Super Mario, we had, oh nice, that is a BMW just drove past me with a huge spoiler that says Stop Patrol. That's pretty funny. Yeah, that's awesome, dude. So, nostalgia, it's big for us 90s kids. I mean, we were the generation that really pioneered the internet when you think about it, right? The internet has been around. It's been around since the 60s. The military developed it. It was the ARPANET. We learned that in school. But the internet really became mainstream in the 90s, and with it, the way we communicated, it changed. I remember being a kid, we had AIM, we had AOL Instant Messenger, and my God, that was a game changer. Back then, you called up your friends on the phone, but the parents would kick you off, right? You'd call up your friend and, why are you on the phone for more than 20 minutes? AIM, it was an outlet. It was a game changer. You could chat with your friends for hours if you were good about it, and you could stay up past your bedtime. You could be chatting with your friends till like 2, 3 in the morning, and your parents would be none the wiser. And you could compare notes. You can orchestrate your story if you were trying to get away with something. It was a game changer. My God. And our generation, we really kind of pioneered that, and it kind of put a gap between us and the generation before us, because they were kind of unwilling to learn it at first. And you'll see this now, and it's not everybody, but there is an unwillingness with the greatest generation, right? The people 70 years and up, because the baby boomers are now they're in their late 50s, their 60s, and they have kind of caught on. You'll see, like, you know, this podcast, I don't know who my audience is yet. You know, this is only our second episode, but you know, our parents, right? I'm 29 years old. My parents are you know, they're in their 60s. Well, my mom, she's going to be turning 60. My father is over 60 now. You know, they've caught on. Like, they use smartphones. They use Facebook. They use social media. And I'm noticing a lot of my friends' parents, they're hopping on, so they're getting onto social media. It's come more about in the past, I'd say, 5 years. But, you know, most of my friends and myself, we've been on social media for, you know, well over 10 years now. Hitting like the 12. I think I set up my Facebook account like 12 years ago or something like that. But within the past 5 years, we're starting to see people's parents that I know, parents of friends, hopping on Facebook more and more, and it's you know, it changes the way you behave on Facebook, because, come on, everybody behaves differently in front of it. It doesn't matter how old you are. Like, I still, you know, and Mom, Dad, if you're listening, you know, I love you dearly, but I am a different person in front of you. Love you with all my heart, but there's things that I would say in front of my friends that I'd never dream of saying in front of you. And it's not to be fake. It's just, you know, things that you don't want to hear about. So, and I respect you in that regard, right? But if you're younger, I can definitely see, you know, having to watch what you say for fear of, you know, your parents. You're now friends with your parents on Facebook. You say the wrong thing, and you're looking at, you know, repercussions. You're looking at being grounded and not going out on Friday night if you're in high school. So I can understand that. But it did take a little longer. But they were willing to learn it. And you see like the elderly though are still having a little. I'm noticing I worked in electronics retail for a while, so I kind of saw that there was a bit of a skill gap, obviously, between, you know, quote-unquote millennials and you know, the greatest generation. You know, your people born in the 1920s, the 1930s. A lot of times they were reluctant to use a cell phone or to have a smartphone at all, and a lot of times they'd be like, "Oh no, this is too much for me. I can't learn it," you know. Or you'd hear all the time, "I'm too dumb to learn. I need a dumb phone for a dummy like me." Things, you know, you'd hear all kinds of stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't so much, you know, them really believing that they were dumb or anything, or a lack of self-esteem or self-confidence like that. It was more so just an unwillingness to change, because the technology, it is rapidly. The AIM, just one of many examples, right? How technology is changing everything, and we were it got me to thinking, right? The point of this podcast is really to be, you know, other than the 90s nostalgia, it's, you know, millennials, we were really the last babies born, anyone born, I'd say, before the year 2000, really the last generation to grow up without having, you know, the world at their fingertips. Like, could you imagine nowadays, right, you need to drive somewhere, not being able to just put in the address and your phone gives you step-by-step directions. You had to whip out a map and actually, like, plot out the course before you go, because you can't be, you know, have a map unfurled in front of you as you're driving, right? Back in the day, you know, you'd be in math class, you'd be doing long division, and your teacher would be like, "You're not always going to have a calculator in front of you." So I think we've all seen that meme, right, with the lying ass teachers. "You're not always going to have a calculator in front of you." And now here we are, you know, since about 2010, Calculator, it comes standard with any phone, even like a flip phone, like not even a smartphone, is going to have a calculator app on it now. At no point are you not going to have access to calculators. So if you really just had to do some long division or multiply some large numbers, you never be really unless you're out in the wilderness and your phone dies or your phone breaks and you don't have access to it, would you be in a situation where you can't just simply whip out your phone and do some math on the fly? So, and the teachers at the time did not foresee the exponential advances in technology that would happen in the years to come. And I'll grant it, neither did we. I mean, I think if you were to take a smartphone and go back in time to, let's say, the year 2000, right? I was 10 years old in the year 2000. If you were to take a smartphone and show it to 10-year-old me, who had a dial-up connection. Broadband did exist in 2000. My family, we didn't have that though. We had dial-up. Your 56K modem that took 3 minutes just to connect you, and if the data traveled through your phone line. So if somebody connected, if somebody picked up a phone call, you were getting booted. There wasn't high-speed video. If you wanted to load a video, it took 5 to 10 minutes. And if you were to take a smartphone and basically show a 10-year-old Jay, right? Like you're able to have a video chat, in real time with somebody halfway around the world, and this technology will be available to you in within the next 10 years. I would have crapped my pants. It wouldn't have even really been conceivable to me at that point. The way technology was then, like the growth of technology has been so exponential. I just want you to think back to 19 years ago, to the year 2000, what technology looked like, right? How fast were computers back then? How much RAM did a computer, and not to get too, for everybody listening, not to throw around too much jargon, right? But I don't have time to go into like RAM and ROM and what that does. But, I think when I was in 5th grade, I had saved up to buy a computer. What I really wanted was a computer, because I'm a nerd and I don't hide it. But I wanted a computer and I wanted a laptop. And my first laptop I got actually in the year 2000. It was a compact Presario laptop, and it had, I want to say it had 512 megabytes of RAM, right? Like, nowadays a computer, if it doesn't have 4 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes of RAM, like that's a slow computer. It's trash, right? I had 512 megabytes of RAM. Think about that, right? I mean, 8 gigabytes, that's so, my computer was 16 times, 16 times the fewer random access memory than a standard computer nowadays. I mean, and that's only in a matter of 19 years. And, not to go into, what's that law that says processing power basically doubles every 2 years, but that's a law in the computing community. Been a while since I've taken computer science. Don't mind me, guys. But my point here is that technology becomes increasingly more powerful and increasingly more capable. I mean, for God's sakes, we've got a Mercedes-Benz that can park itself. There's cars that can parallel park themselves. They can keep you in your lane if you're veering off. They can brake for you if you're going to rear end something. And great, this is great technology. This is going to help, the human race advance. But what impact is it having, on our cognitive ability? Right, and there, I know, here he goes, being a Debbie Downer. But Jay, technology's making everything better for us. And it is, but at the same time, I think it would be prudent for us to consider the cognitive ability that we are losing not having to do some of these things for ourselves. And here's a case in point, right? Like like I can use a typewriter. If somebody were to whip out a typewriter, I still remember how to use it because they were still around in the 90s, and my grandpa had one at his house that I used to have fun, writing with. I know how to use it. I could use that if I didn't have access to a computer. If, let's just say, I were transported back, to the 1940s, into World War II, I could use a typewriter and use it proficiently. Another example of, I guess, almost dead technology, right? A manual transmission car. You still see them around the world, but in the United States, I think I was reading that like less than 5% of vehicles now come with a manual transmission. But I think there is value in learning how to use it. My father taught me how to do it. Thanks, Dad, for letting me burn up the clutch on your truck, learning how to drive a manual. But I think there's value in knowing how to do that, right? Like if I were to be in Europe or a South American country, I would have no problem, driving one, and it is, you do have more control of the vehicle, using it. You can get better gas mileage if you're shifting at the appropriate intervals and so forth. So I think it was a good skill to learn, but it's not something that you need nowadays. Like, most cars for the past 40, 50 years, the automatic transmission is nothing new, but again, it's a nifty skill to have, and I think my life is enriched for knowing it. So, not to go too off topic here, I think that there is value in learning how to do things that may not be so much required to function in society anymore. You guys see what I'm saying? Like, so while you do have a calculator, in the palm of your hands at all times, I think there's still value in knowing how to do things manually, like computer percentage, how to do long division and so forth, right? How to do mathematical computations, by hand or in your head if you're that good. Me, I'm not the fastest child around, so I use my fingers. I draw up. I remember being a kid, and if you had to calculate a percentage, making the little butterfly for a proportion, the is over of, and so forth and whatnot. So I just think that there's the technology, while good, while making life so much easier, and we all use it. I love my technology. I'm just saying I think it's of value to know how to function if it were to fail, right? Because if you had somebody who was used to being in a car that basically drives itself, right? Like it'll keep you in your lane, it'll brake for you, it'll parallel park itself. The person's driving ability is not going to be the same as somebody who grew up, with a car that didn't do any of that stuff. You follow, like, it's just, that they're kind of gonna, it's a use it or lose it type scenario, and they're not using it. They're not gonna use their eye-hand coordination to operate the car when they know it does it for them. So I think, it would be important to, make sure that you also learn how to drive without that stuff. That way, if the technology were to fail, you're not going to get in a car accident and die. I mean, all technology at some point. I've worked in electronics repair too, and I have seen, right, like when technology fails, like sometimes people don't know what to do, and I think it's important to know what to do and to have that confidence that, like, okay, if this, like, let's just prepare that we're not in a world-ending situation because technology doesn't work. It's the same thing as, like, I was never a Boy Scout, but in Boy Scouts, they teach you how to build a fire. They teach you how to survive in the wild if you didn't have technology. And that's even, like, not technology like we have now. They're saying, like, if you didn't have technology like a compass, right? Like, they teach you which side of a tree moss grows on, so you can find north and you can find your way back to civilization if you were lost and stuff like that. So I think it is very important, you know, and I think a lot of people, you know, who are having children now, I think it's important to teach you. I certainly would with my kids, you know, just, you know, make them aware that, you know, technology can fail and what you need to do in the event that it's not around. So, yeah, I guess I'm getting a little, you know, preachy and back in my day, but millennials, we were really the last ones to grow up without technology, or at least in the capacity that it's in now. I mean, we had technology. We basically pioneered the internet. We kept a lot of it a secret from our parents. It took them a little longer to adapt, but we basically pioneered the internet. You know, we were taught how to use search engines in grade school, and we kind of like took that, you know, took it to the next level. And a lot of our generation, we've built things like we've built Reddit. You know, we have all these innovations, you know, that have come about as of the internet, and the way communication works now it's so different. Like it's like back in the 90s, you couldn't just simply video chat someone in another country. Getting a hold of somebody in a country, you know, you'd pay an arm and a leg for a long distance phone call, and your parents would kill you. You were not speaking to somebody in another country when you were a kid. And educate me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't think you were going to speak to someone in another country when you were a kid. If somebody was traveling outside the country, you simply would not hear from that person. Maybe you'd do pen pals and you'd write letters, but again, that would take weeks, if not a month, to get to them, right? And we didn't have the shipping capacity like we have now. Shipping has become, it's a, you know, multi-trillion-dollar business. There was nothing like Amazon. You could order things online, but it wasn't instant gratification like it is now. And that's our technology. It's gotten us to a point we are an instant gratification society now. And I noticed that a couple of years ago, that I think I was in an area where I didn't have good cell reception. You know, my data speeds were slow, and it was taking like a minute to load up a web page, and I was getting antsy. And it was at that moment I kind of caught myself, and I was like, you know, when I was a kid, I would be grateful just to have that internet connection, because the fact that it took a minute to load that's nothing compared to, you know, back in the dial-up days. You know, it took 3 minutes just to connect to the internet, and you get that. I can't do the sound effect, but you guys know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. The what it sounded like when your dial-up connection was connecting to the internet. So, you know, think about that. Next time that, you know, you don't have a reliable connection, or it keeps dropping, or it's taking a long time, be like, you know, like, just when I was a kid, like, that's how it worked. Like, and I've also noticed over the years that my attention span has decreased. And I think, ask yourself, right? Give yourself an honest evaluation, right? How has my attention span changed over the years? Because I bet you that most people, their attention span is not nearly what it once was. You'll be on YouTube and you'll start watching a video for 30 seconds and see like, oh, here's another video. Or you'll be listening to like a song and listen to the first 30 seconds and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I wanted to listen to AC/DC now. It's my attention span is shot. It is shot, and I will be the first one to admit it. It's almost like an induced it's almost like a technology-induced ADHD. And I'm cognizant of it. I don't, you know, I think the only way to go back would be to, you know, limit my use of technology. But I do think that's something to be aware of too, and I think that affects I find that I can't pay attention as much as I could. Unless it's just something I find so engrossing and really care about. Like, I can't imagine sitting through a college lecture anymore. Unless it was, again, something I was really, really interested in. Like, sit in a college lecture and you'll see people are on their phones and they're giving it half their attention. And I'm not sure it's disrespectful to that professor. I mean, like, when I was in lecture, I was not on my phone a lot, but I was, and I see it after the fact. Like, if I was a professor, I would feel disrespected. I would definitely feel disrespected. But at the same time, like, I think we need a new way. We might need a new way to do education and to do learning. Like, it's the personal responsibility of the person in the class to pay attention and absorb the information. But I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves here, how many people can sit through, an hour and a half lecture and not be on their phone, not be checking social media, not texting their friends? Try it. Challenge yourself to do something like that. Challenge yourself to watch a TV show without looking at your phone a few times. It's not easy, guys. I've caught myself so many times. I'm like, wow, I can't even pay attention to a half-hour TV show. I can't even be entertained without looking at my phone, much less pay attention to something I find boring, like a college lecture about a class I don't really care about. So that's just something that I've observed over the years. It's just, the technology, it has decreased our attention spans, and it's something that I think it needs to be addressed, and it needs to come to the forefront a little bit. That given the media, the overwhelming access to different media outlets that we have, I think we are going to need to change the way that we present information. And I don't have a solution, and I'm not pretending I have one, but I think it's something that we're going to have to examine in the years to come, is the way people retain information. Because we know, there's people learn differently, right? We've got oral learners, we've got visual learners, auditory learners. But the technology, it is affecting everyone's attention spans. And call me crazy, I don't know if I would probably limit my kids' access to technology. Were I a parent, I'd probably try to put some kind of limit. I mean, I had limits on my video games growing up. I would argue that video games were a little different back then. This is gonna get a little anecdotal, but I struggled learning to read as a kid. I was below average reading comprehension level, and by the time I was in 4th grade, in 3rd grade, I got my first video games. My parents, they were not all for it at first, but they kind of caved. I got my Nintendo 64, and this is where we're jumping into that 90s nostalgia a little bit. The Nintendo 64 was... Let me know in the comments below, guys, but in my opinion, it was the greatest video game console of all time. Like, my God, like, I love the controller. The games were engrossing. They had great storylines that drew you in. And back then, due to the limitations of the technology, there wasn't really voice acting in video games. And if there was, it was really limited. So in order to be good at the games, to progress in them, to get involved in the story and be able to beat the game, you had to read. And there was some pretty advanced vocabulary in those games that were, they were aimed at children, they were aimed at teens. So, and to me, it was a motivational factor. The reason I was having trouble learning to read, it was, I didn't care. Honestly, like, if we're being honest, it was a bunch of boring school stuff that, like, I was like, sitting there as a 7, 8-year-old, I'm like, oh, the American Revolution? Okay, yeah, that's great. I don't really care about Paul Revere, though. What about Super Mario? What about how is Link gonna defeat Ganondorf? I cared about that stuff. So when I got the N64, those games were very heavily text-based, and I found I was not very good at those games because I couldn't read what the hell was going on. So I I made a active effort to improve my reading ability, and by the time 4th grade rolled around, I was getting like 98th percentile in reading comprehension, and found myself in like honors English class and honors social studies and all that, because my reading ability had improved, and with it, naturally came better grades. I mean, that was the byproduct of me wanting to be good at the video games. The grades were never my motivation. I did not care about grades when I was a kid. I got decent grades because I had I did have some talent. I'm not denying that. Like, I'm not tooting my own horn too much. I had some talent, right? Like, if I saw something once, I pretty much retain it. I actually, when I was in 9th grade, I had a teacher who I used to draw a lot. I went to school. I would just draw a lot. I was a doodler. I love drawing. I love art. I wanted to be a cartoonist when I grew up. You're right. Like, when I was in 7th grade, I could have told you all about Matt Groening and Seth MacFarlane, because it was stuff I cared about. I cared about animation. I cared about cartoons. And I thought that the 90s were a great time for that. My God, like 90s Cartoon Network. Oh, so like the animation quality, the stories. And there were so many talented cartoonists, right? You had Craig McCracken, Gendy Tartakovsky, just so many cartoonists. The artwork, the story, it was just so. That's another topic. 90s Cartoon Network, but I cared about that stuff. So I was in school. I'd be doodling all the time. And I would still get decent grades, but I had a teacher in 9th grade, and she's like, oh, you're not going to pass my test if you're just drawing and not taking notes. And I was such a cocky kid at that point. I told her, like, look, Mrs. G, like, this is all stuff I haven't learned before, right? I've learned about the Indus River Valley civilization, and I've learned about, the Nile River and, the Egyptians and how that stuff all worked. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get an 80 on this test, whether I take notes or not. And she goes like, look, I'll bet you, like, you won't pass this test. If you get higher than an 80, you don't have to take notes. You can sit in my class and draw for all I care. So Friday rolls around, the test comes out, and I get an 89, and she goes, all right, hey, you're welcome to draw, in my class. I guess, you don't need to take notes. You retain the information. And I was like, all right, cool, thank you. So the grades were the byproduct, but the game was a great educational aid. And I'm grateful that I did learn how to read. My parents obviously were not happy at my lower reading and writing abilities when I was younger. I was in speech therapy when I was a kid. I had a hard time learning how to say TH. When I was a kid, it was 3 o'clock in Philadelphia, and I think I'm going to lose a tooth, so I need to go home. I was in speech lab, I was in math lab, reading lab. If it was a lab, I was in it. I'm surprised I wasn't created in a lab. So the video games, back then, the 90s video games, I found them to be a great educational aid, unbeknownst to me. They helped me, and I will, to this day, I will cite video games as an educational resource in my life. By the way, there's a lot of hate on video games. No, not obviously. Like, there's nothing really that educational about video games. Maybe now, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some games that involve historical accuracy and things like that, and it's argued that video games help your pattern recognition abilities. But for me, they help me improve my reading and writing abilities. There's no doubt in my mind that I attribute it to that. It was straight up. It was a motivational factor. I wasn't motivated before because I just didn't care, and then an application, and then there was a practical application for me to want to care because I had the game. I had the video games now, and I wanted. When I was a kid, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to beat, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I wanted to beat Super Mario 64, and I don't think, you have an honest conversation with most kids, right? Like, take away, like, the fact that their parents would be all pissed at them and they'd get punished. They'd tell you the same thing, right? Like, I don't want to go to school and, learn about, learn multiplication tables. Like, what? Who cares? I want to learn how to catch Pikachu, right? I want to learn. I want to know, that I can use a Thunderstone and evolve him into Raichu. But if I do that, his speed stat will never max out, right? That's what I cared about. So what I'm saying is that, like, the way we do learning in the future, we might have to examine that and factor in little anecdotes like these into the way we do education, and also, like, the way that we teach technology and its integration into society. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear what everybody thinks about this in the comments, guys. So please do not be shy. Comment away. If you think I'm full of crap, let me know. If you think, like, I've never let my kids near video games, there's nothing educational about it, they just teach kids, to shoot up schools and be violent, let me know. I want to know your opinion on this. But for me, I found them to be a positive thing. And, I found it to be a life enricher. So another topic, I guess, of 90s nostalgia is, and this is something that I observe now, right? I do a lot of driving around for work. I'm driving home right now. That's why I'm making this podcast. More or less to pass the time, but if you guys want to hear me talk, that's a plus too. But what I've noticed in the years recent is I do not see kids playing outside anymore. And I think that, again, here we go, back to this guy harping on how much better, it was to be a kid in the 90s, and you don't, whatever, man, you don't get it. Our generation's different. But you don't see kids playing outside a lot anymore. Go drive around, at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon when kids are getting out of school and adults are getting out of work. You really do not see kids playing outside anymore. And I do find that problematic because, like, look, I love video games. I love it as much as the next person, but there needs to be a balance. Yes, video games were a big part of my childhood, and I would never tell you otherwise. They've ultimately, I would argue they've even shaped who I am today. But I would say that you need that balance, because you do need to be able to go out, and so, like, playing like games with your friends. Like, we used to always play like games like Red Rover. I don't know if you guys remember that. 90s kids, you'll remember that. The game where everybody holds hands and you try to run through and break through them. People would get hurt sometimes, but it built character. I really do think it built character. But if you don't have kids playing outside, there's a couple of problems. Like, this is the most extreme example. You have somebody who, they become a pasty, fat, pimply, like, shut-in who doesn't know how to socialize with people. And that's an extreme, right? That's an extreme. That's not going to happen to everybody. But you do need to go outside, and, I think exercise, it's important. Like, kids have high energy levels. They need to run around. They need to vent that energy. They need to put it into something positive. And I think it's it helps you develop friendships. I mean, yes, you can develop friendships in video games because we have things like Xbox Live and PSN, and you can communicate with people and you can socialize on the internet. But think about this: what don't you have when you're socializing over the internet? You don't have body language. I mean, okay, if you're in a video chat, you have a little body language, but you don't have eye contact. And these are important things that help you as you grow, right? To hold eye contact. How to read and interpret body language. I think that's a really important ability that you need to develop when you're a kid, or at least in your adolescence, is, because that's going to help you in your professional life, being able to read body language and know what it means. Because what is it like? Correct me in the comments. I know I'm going to be wrong on this, but it's like 60 to 80% of communication is body language. Actual verbal communication, it's only like 40 to 30%, something like that. 40 to 20% is only is verbal. It's the bulk of our communication actually comes from body language, something like that, right? And you can get into, again, a topic for another day, but I think you can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you don't know how to read body language and react to it. I think that's really important. And I think, not playing outside, kids are not having exercise for one, so we're going to see health problems, and the obesity rate definitely up. I mean, that should be no secret that if you're not spending time exercising in the form of for kids, just playing tag or playing Red Rover or a game of we used to play a lot of wiffle ball. Some of my finest memories was, street hockey. You'd have the net set up in the middle of the road and somebody would yell, "Car! Car!" And you had to move the nets out of the way. Oh my God, I wouldn't trade that. I would not trade that for anything in the world. I'll tell you, you can tell me, Jay, I'll give you $6 million. I'm going to erase all your memories of your childhood. That's priceless to me. I would not trade that for anything in the world, guys. I mean, seriously. Those were such good times. I had such great memories. And yeah, I mean, there were confrontations too, but I mean, that taught me how to handle confrontation as an adult. Kids don't always get along. I got picked on sometimes, and I learned how to respond to it. I think that's helped as an adult. I think that's helped me in my learned management skills to resolve conflicts between my employees. And resolve, if I were to have a conflict, how to resolve it without escalating. I think that's all culminated into that. So those are my thoughts on 90s nostalgia and millennials being the last generation to grow up without readily available advanced technology. And of course it's open for interpretation what advanced means, but I think you guys will understand the technology gap between a kid who was born in the year 2000 and a kid born in 1980. I mean, it's night and day. The advances have come so far, and it just continues to grow exponentially, year after year. I'm excited to see what technology we will see in our lifetime. I'm really, things that, when you think about it, right, you think about like teleportation in terms of travel. We think that that's a far reach, but I mean, teleportation, it's disassembling at the molecular level and then reassembling. We couldn't have fathomed a smartphone as a 10-year-old, right? If you would have brought that back, I would have told you, no way, you're lying, that's not real, that's not really going to happen. And lo and behold, here it is, and it's in the palm of everyone's fingertips, to the point where, smart devices, tablets, laptops, phones, devices that can connect to Wi-Fi and establish a data connection outnumber people in this country, right? I think it's an average of 2.6 connected devices per people in this country. So, I mean, you can't tell me it's not the technology that we will see in the next 10 to 20 years, and then beyond that in our lifetime. It's not going to be something crazy that we can't even fathom right now. So, maybe mainstream space travel, right? We've got Elon Musk working on SpaceX, private space travel. Who knows what we're going to see? I am so excited. I can't wait. I just think it's important to look back and understand what we had in the past, understand how to use it, understand what can happen when technology fails, and and remember where we've been, because I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything in the world. Anyway, this has been Jay Tahoe's Fabulous Podcast, episode 2. Please rate, comment, subscribe. Really excited to have this going. I think I'm going to do more of these. I really enjoy just getting what's on my mind off as I'm driving. So and if you'd like to come on the podcast, reach out. You can email me at therealjtahoe@gmail.com. I'd love to read your emails, answer your questions on the podcast, and comment below if there's any topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Anyway, everybody have a wonderful evening, and I will see you guys on the next episode.